Welcome to the North Hills Church podcast, where we take a deeper dive into unique content created just for you. I'm your host, Ryan Ferguson, and I'm not sure that unique content is the word for this particular podcast, as we try to pair a couple of podcasts along with the series that we're doing at North Hills Church on Jesus, primarily, and politics and how those two relate. So that is very unique content in today's day and age. Let me give you a couple little intros of who else is with me today on this podcast. To my left, as always, seated to my left, are the guests. First, we've got Alan Shear.
Ryan, good to see you.
And you, Alan. Thanks for jumping in.
Yeah.
And Matt Nesberg is here.
Good to see you, Ryan.
Thank you. Very professional radio voice there. Real quick, just say what you guys do at North Hills in a general way for listeners who may not know you very well.
I'd like to first say that I am battling a head cold, so I'm all up here, and I apologize if that's painful to listen to. And I'm the pastor of counseling ministries here at North Hills Church.
That was a kind apology, you know.
Well,
little stuffy voice, itchy throat. Alan, what do you do around here?
I'm pretty much the missions pastor, but I have been grounded since the beginning of COVID, and so I've been much more connected to what's going on here in America than I normally would be.
So kind of on an outreach realm, projects we've been doing. Many of those things are on other podcasts. We're not going to go into those right now because they will derail us.
So great.
From this particular area. So again, we're talking about Jesus and politics. These podcasts are going to be additional information. They are not necessarily connected to what happened on a previous Sunday or the upcoming Sunday in the service. We just want to kind of come along beside everybody and give some foundational information, truth, grounded in Scripture, and quite honestly, a conversation between three elders who all have disparate views of politics in and of itself between us as leaders. So that tension may come out in different conversations depending on where we're at each week. And this week we just want to start maybe a little bit more general, a way to think about leaders and government. I know, Matt, you and I have had a lot of talks about this over the years. A lot of even this whole podcast idea, so everyone knows, does flow from a burden you had to kind of try to connect our people to some truth and some responses. So why don't you kind of set us up where we're going to go today?
Yeah, so for me, the burden came from the most recent election season in 2020, and primarily because of the way I saw Christians treating one another over political issues, over who they vote for, who they don't vote for, what issues they speak out for, and what issues they don't speak out for, from so many perspectives and so many angles. And as the heat increased, Christians degraded in our activities towards one another in social media and in person, it seemed to me. And it seemed to me that Christians were missing some things that we say and that we see in Scripture about how we relate to one another.
Let me just jump in there.
Yeah.
I appreciate how you said that objectively, that it seems to you. I don't think that if we talk to anybody's going to be like, oh no, Christians did a great job with the election in 2020. They treated each other so kindly. It was an unbelievable witness to the world of love and grace. So
I think so too.
I appreciate that.
But I'm trying to leave room for the
being very kind.
the 1%.
Yeah.
So then on that note, everybody could see how the social media posts and the public and private interactions, so much of which seemed to be unhealthy. And I was thinking of Jesus' words in John 17 when he prays that we will be one, that his followers, those that come after him, will be one as he and the Father are one. And I don't see in the Scripture exceptions to that, especially around political things. And so it hurt my heart, frankly, to see Christians fighting so vehemently and destroying one another, devouring one another over these issues, and kind of birthed in me the desire for us to have conversations. And can we, and kind of answer the question, can we have these conversations as Christians differently? Alan Jones, who's a pastor in Tennessee, said something to the effect of, what if we traded outrage for trust, confidence, and stillness? And I wondered that. What if we traded that outrage and as Christians showed a better way?
Yeah. I love that there's a huge passion of you for God's people to be unified. I mean, the high priestly prayer there in John is mind-blowing in one way. So that's a tall task in 1 or 100 podcasts. So for today, I'm wondering if we can kind of bring it down into the realm of, and we're going to try to root everybody in as many scriptural responses as we can, obviously. So let's talk a little bit about what does God say about leaders? What does our response look like? So I think if we can start by looking at leaders and government as a thing, then we can get to how we treat each other, because it's kind of the fundamental piece under there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because so much of the acrimony was
Wow.
not even around
Acrimony.
That's my first $20 word.
I really don't know what that means. Does that mean I'm a moron?
No, acrimony means conflict.
Okay, great.
Yeah. So much of the acrimony was not even so much around platforms as it, like I've experienced in past elections. It was around people. Like if you like Donald Trump or don't like Donald Trump, that's a lightning rod from somewhere. And if you like Joe Biden or whoever else, and
Yeah, almost like really the ethic of people being afraid to say who they voted for more than I've ever seen. Because if you say I voted for Trump or I voted for Biden, there's a litany of attachments that must mean about you and your character if you did.
or if you voted for a third-party candidate, or if you didn't vote at all, like it was very much about. So it was about loyalty. So
Surely everyone votes.
no, I've heard
Really?
that some people don't vote.
For those who are listening and
Perhaps un-Americans, but go ahead.
and are tuning in their ears to the sarcasm,
Don't want to name names.
we are choosing to be honest about kind of even our own political choices, and I am the one they're making fun of, who is apparently un-American and is the only one who doesn't choose to vote and exercise the, in big air quotes, God-given right. But thank you both for derailing our entire conversation and putting me up on a bullseye, and now I'm going to get 800 emails.
Congratulations.
Ryan F. at
And
northhillschurch.com.
Yeah.
Ryan F.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So you were saying?
Yeah, let me bring us back, Alan, if you don't mind. Let's kind of come back to it. I love this platform versus people. I think one important piece that came out here that I think will actually help our listeners as we talk about our response towards leaders is at North Hills. I don't really want to talk about everywhere else at this point. I don't have any influence there, but here, on any given Sunday, in any given conversation, you can have that very dynamic where somebody hates/loves Donald Trump, somebody hates/loves Joe Biden. In a given Sunday here, and I use the term love, I think everybody knows what I mean there. I'm exaggerating that just to make the point. But I think a good piece to inform that idea of the person in charge is to get a little bit of a historical biblical context about leaders that Christians were under throughout time. I've done a little bit of study on this, kind of prompted from something that Matt said, kind of when Peter and Paul were writing and when they died, who was in charge, and some of the commands that they give in their letters regarding that person in charge. So I don't know if you want to jump in on that, Matt, Alan. I think we'll probably get to a couple of thoughts that you have later about another one, but like historical context. What were Christians in the New Testament like under leaders? What did that look like?
So we have some commands and about politics and how we treat political leaders in the New Testament, which we'll get to. Those were written, I think, mostly when Nero was the emperor of Rome. Of course, Rome was the empire from the time Jesus came on the earth throughout. Nero was on the throne from 54 to 68 A.D. I think Mark, I'm just shooting off the top of my head, I think Mark is the earliest gospel, and it was written in the mid-50s. And then some of the epistles on up to like 2 Timothy, I think, was written in the early 80s. early 60s, early to mid 60s. So I think that many of the Gospels, if not all of them, and most of the epistles, including all the Pauline epistles, were written while Nero was on the throne, including Peter's epistles too, because I think Peter was killed in the late 60s.
68.
Yeah, so Paul and Peter were likely martyred by Nero. And just to give you an idea, Nero is kind of a byword. You got Nero and Hitler and some other Stalin and people like that. But Nero was as bad as you've heard. He was a sexual deviant. He was brutal. He was a narcissistic ruler. When we talk about rulers in America being narcissistic, like Nero makes them all look silly. His adopted father was murdered by his incestuous mother so that Nero could become the emperor. Nero claimed he was God. Now, you can say a lot of things about American leaders, and a lot of them have been narcissistic. I don't know of an American leader who actually said, I am God. But Nero claimed he was God.
Not only said that, but that then became part of policy.
Yeah.
Which is why if you said Jesus is Lord, it wasn't just a confessional.
Right.
It's
a political statement.
Yeah, it's now treason.
It was sedition. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So Nero had his mother and his first wife killed. He stomped his second wife to death and then married a man posing as a woman, and then castrated a boy and married him too. He would later pin the Great Fire of Rome on Christians and burn them alive because of it. And ultimately he would martyr Peter and Paul and many other Christians. So this is the kind of guy, whatever the New Testament says about our leaders, this is the kind of guy that most, if not all, of those commands in the New Testament were given under that kind of leadership.
So what we're doing here, and we're not just trying to be gratuitous with details about an ancient leader, I think what it does is it sets up, in one sense, a greater to lesser argument. If Peter and Paul and Jesus were saying things about government under that type of system, where the leader was literally saying, worship me, those commands to us do seem somewhat, I don't know if the best word is easier, maybe lighter is better. I'm not taking away from the seriousness of our day or leaders or anyone's view. I'm just saying when it says, and Peter is the one who wrote, the one whole section, we might even read it later, 1 Peter, if you want to look it up, 1 Peter 2, 13 to 17, that ends with the phrase, 3 words, honor the emperor. So he wrote that. That very person he's writing about may have ordered his death. And then that letter is being read from that point on in the church when that leader or his follower is still in power.
Yeah, and I would take it a step further to say that in all the conversations we have today, some of those are about religious liberty and life. And Nero was a direct, not indirect through laws, direct affront to religious liberty and life. Like he was not just allowing policies that inhibited those things, he was himself responsible for destroying those things. And yet, even then, we have these commands in the New Testament.
So let's then wrestle deeper now. We're kind of at the top of the funnel. We've brought ourselves down a little bit. So what does God say about leaders? Can we kind of just jump in there? And we might have some specifics, or we might riff a little bit, but what are some of the things that God says in the New Testament, Old Testament about leaders? And the scriptures would use multiple words there, emperor, king, governor, authority. What does he say? Where do we want to land in a response?
You want to go Daniel?
No.
Because you talked about
So
Daniel.
let's start in the New Testament, go back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you take that you want to start at that 1 Peter passage,
Sure.
For example. That 1 Peter passage, 1 Peter 2, 1 to 4, thank you. 1 Peter 2, 1 to 4 says that we are to pray for and give thanks for political leaders. So that's the first kind of statement there that we have in Peter. And
that's the Timothy passage, which we can jump into.
Oh,
as
1
well.
Timothy, yeah. 1 Timothy, my bad.
Yeah, 1 Timothy chapter 2. First
It's
of all, then
all
I
in the
urge that
Bible.
supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings, and all who are in high positions, Then he gives us the reason that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. This is good. Everything he just said, praying for those types of people, that's good. And it's pleasing in the sight of God, our Savior, who desires all people to be saved and come to a knowledge of the truth. So pray for leaders and those in high positions.
So I think the thing that's in there that we probably have more trouble with, I think a lot of people pray for leaders and maybe even pray imprecatory prayers, kind of strike them down kind of prayers. But the difficult one there is give thanks for them and the idea that it's pleasing to God. That's sticky. So I think that probably our audience, if it's North Hills, based on the survey that was recently taken, it is a large majority Republican, typically leaning Republican audience. And so I'm going to assume that most of the people that would listen to this aren't thrilled about the most recent election of Joe Biden and the Biden-Harris administration. So given that 60 to 70% of our congregation leans Republican, me too, they're unhappy about that election result. And yet, Timothy, written by Paul under Nero, Paul says to Timothy that we are to pray for, great, give thanks for, ouch, because this pleases God.
How do we do that? What does that mean? Because I think what can rise up in our heads is, whoa. I can't be thankful for a person who produces X. I'm not going to fill in the political blank there, but that they go this way, they believe in this, they're driving this agenda. And given that all of those might be accurate observations, what's Paul going after there in giving thanks? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I struggle with it, that and the idea of honoring them, I think, are kind of in the same category for me. Pray, as we've said, is so general. That can mean anything. And
God be with government.
Or if it's not imprecatory, like, God save Joe Biden or God save Donald Trump or whatever I think we all can relate to that. But having this posture of gratefulness, I think that's for me, like, there are certain political leaders that, I've tried to bring it down to what does it really mean for me, not just in the abstract. And there are some political leaders that just I struggle with, and I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe I'll just give thanks for the good things they occasionally do. But then there are some leaders that's like, I'm not aware of them ever doing anything good. And yet, like in the case of Nero, I'm still called to give thanks for them. And the first thing I came up with is just, we as believers should have a pervasive attitude and perspective of gratefulness, because we know, even if it's Nero, God is ultimately in charge. And we know that even if Nero chops our head off or burns us, we have eternal life. We have hope. Like, the things that are most precious to us can never be taken away.
And I think this is where I just want to interject here. The way you said that is interesting. Is my thanksgiving is driven, informed, impassioned by something much greater than the object. So both Peter and Paul, in their perspective letters, give us an object to either be thankful for, king, those in high positions. So it's much broader than even just the main guy, in Paul's words. Timothy, honor, Nero. My ability to do that goes well beyond the object of it. It can't be dependent upon the object, or it'll never happen in one sense.
Yeah. It's still hard. I realize that our audience is largely Republican, but the same is true when Donald Trump was president. I mean, the vitriol against him as president was, I don't know, the worst in my memory. I know it's been worse in American history, but the worst in my memory, the vitriol against him. And so there are certainly people, there are certainly those who voted not for Donald Trump, that would have been just as unhappy. People in our church just as unhappy at his behavior and his presidency, but the command is the same. So it's not just a command for Republicans or Democrats. It is a command for Christians. And I also, I just want to kind of broaden it that way, but then also the Christians are given lots of hard commands.
Yes.
In the New Testament. We are called to rejoice in sufferings, to give thanks always. So these commands specifically about political leaders are not unlike the rest of the New Testament. They're actually really in line with the other commands of the New Testament, and they are there's lots of commands that Christians are given that are hard for us to wrestle with.
And I'd love to make a point on that. I think you could say, aren't all commands to do righteous hard?
Sure.
Like, for our audience, with this just popped into my head, so I'm going to do a little dig at Matt. Please know that we've known each other for decades, and our wives and us are best friends. But of course, in your marriage, at some point, I'm just guessing, Katie's had a hard time respecting you as a person.
No, I've made it easy.
Oh, really? Huh. Interesting.
Because she's here. Is this like Springer? She's here. Come on in.
Let's bring her on.
Let's bring Katie up. Yeah, Katie, if you could talk about Matt and his behavior. But again, all joking aside,
yeah, definitely.
We can look at, how can I be thankful for Donald Trump? I struggle with that. The way he used his words, just how can you be thankful for that? But again, all of these commands for us to do righteousness, it seems, to do anything righteous, are beyond us because it is a supernatural thing. Jesus did teaching with his disciples on marriage, and they're like, well, how can anybody get married? This is a hard teaching. How do we even do that?
Right.
So we're trying to root everybody in the fact that there's always tension in these commands, but these are commands that God's people have had since they were written in every culture, in every situation, in every king, high position, governor, emperor situation throughout time. And they are hard, but we're drawing our eyes way bigger than to just the person, but to the God who's in charge.
And so that kind of brings you to Romans 13:1, which talks about the fact that authorities are placed there by God. So that helps, like it helps in one sense, and in another sense it doesn't help, to know that the Biden-Harris administration, the Trump-Pence administration, were placed there by God. And depending on your political persuasion, you might go, yes, about one, and no way about the other, as if what happened in the other was an exception to God's sovereign rule. But actually, Romans 13:1 and 2, and verse 4, says that there is no authority except by God. And it says, therefore, whoever resists the authority resists what God has appointed. So there is, and I know it's sticky and it's tricky to try to apply those things, and it's another point of wrestling, but they go with God appoints authorities, and I can be thankful, I can give thanks for those things. I can pray for and give thanks.
And I find that for myself, because I'm just trying to apply this to my struggles, and I've had many of them over the last 2 years, that when I feel like an overwhelming sense of rage or fear or, all these strong emotions which can kind of dominate the way I view the world. It's like the world is on fire, and it's because I've located my hope in something. Like I thought this president would do X, Y, or Z. I thought this administration, this party, and now it's being taken away from me by something that's evil, and so I hate that thing. And those things may be realities in a limited sense, but that's where that broader perspective, again, you can't take away what I have in Jesus. And that has to be way more than just a slogan when we're facing a circumstance like this. Like my life, when people look at our lives, whatever our disagreements and our struggles, they should see people who are characterized by the fruit of the Spirit, which is love and joy and peace and thankfulness, rather than by, we're not an angry people. We're not a disdainful people. We're not a dismissive people.
And so, since we outed Ryan, I'll out myself because this is a struggle. It's a struggle. So I voted for Donald Trump. and not because I like the guy's personality, but because many of his policies I agree with. So I voted for him, and I wanted him to get reelected, but he did not, as we know. So it's very hard for me to, when you think about pray for, give thanks for. On the one hand, I can say, yes, I can see that God is in control of kings and sets them up. On the other hand, it is very hard to pray for and give thanks for and honor God for someone who does things that feel so and are in many ways anti-Christian.
Yes.
That whose policies are many of which are when Joe Biden comes into office and starts signing executive orders that make abortions easier almost immediately, it just feels like there's a direct line, if that makes sense, to Christian morality, to Christian ethics. And then some of the stories that have come out since that, take with a grain of salt, because there's so many lies mixed with truth, but threats to religious freedom that are being considered at the highest levels in the land. So those kinds of things as Christians, it's like, it just seems like there's this direct line. And I read about Nero and I go, yeah, but they were dealing with that then. It's just hard, is what I'm saying. We live in this area of tension that I know Donald Trump was not perfect. He was, I in many ways, I hated every time he opened his mouth. But at the same time, there were some good things. And it was easy to give thanks for those good things. It's harder for me now.
So if we can kind of step back here for a second, because we want to root people in, not necessarily things to do, but in mindsets that move towards this unity, this being one. We're rooting thanksgiving not in the object or their behavior. Because I'm working through Ezekiel right now, and there are chapter after chapter of God saying what he's going to do to certain countries and their rulers and their governments, and they are not pleasant things. So when we say thanksgiving, we're not saying that you look at everything they do and we have to affirm it. That's not what we're saying at all. It's this person is being placed here in a position of power, and God is in charge. Therefore, in all things, I can still be thankful. When it comes to honor, I can therefore look at someone in that position and recognize them not as honorable in and of themselves, but they are honorable in that Yahweh put them there. The honor they have is derivative, and therefore I can recognize it. So over and over and over, we're going back to, what do I believe about God? Who is God? What's really going on in this world? And then, okay, now when I run into someone who's different than me, who also loves Jesus, shouldn't that change then the way I look and speak and love and challenge and argue even that reality? If I can give thanks for them and honor them because of who God is, then when I look at someone who agrees with my opposite, but they love Jesus, well, the way we go about that is now going to be completely transformed. I would hope, I think.
Yeah, and that's what's so discouraging. Like, it's one thing to see people railing on one political leader or another, but it seems like often like 100% of those emotions and words and feelings are transferred. Well, now you like Donald Trump, you voted for Donald Trump. Well, everything that I might feel and think about him is now on you, and you're part of that, and like pretty much all of the words and all of it is just like, I'm now free, not only free, but almost like I am now righteous to heap that on you, which takes it to a whole nother step.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let me do something kind of out of nowhere, put you on the spot, Matt, for 1 second. So when it comes to this idea of giving thanks and honor, put your if you don't know Matt well, Matt is passionate about loving people and serving people. So will you put your pastor hat on for a second, that shepherd's heart, put that on purpose, and maybe let's step out of talking about this as a thing and say, if you had a moment when it comes to this thanksgiving and honor and how that leads to unity, what would you want to say to our people? Can I off the cuff you with something like that?
Yeah. Here's what I would say, just off the cuff. I would say I don't at all have a problem with somebody who wrestles with knowing what this looks like and means. I think all three of us are doing that. What does this look like? What does it mean to give thanks to Nero, or for Nero, if you think that our current president or former president was Nero? I don't have a problem at all. In fact, that's what I want, is for us to wrestle with it. I have a problem with Christians who disregard it, with statements like, yeah, but, they all start with yeah, but that wasn't a democracy, or yeah, but whatever. It wasn't as bad as this, or it's a different form of government, or it's a this, or it's a that. And so I want us, that's where I want us to wrestle with. I want us not just to go, oh yeah? Well, I'm getting my guns, let's go. But rather go, okay, wait a second, what does this mean? I don't know what it means. What does this look like in the 21st century when they're in previously much more free America, there seems to be increasing antagonism towards Christianity specifically, as well as the ongoing evil of abortion and many other evils. So that's the thing that if my heart for Christians, people in our church, is that we would wrestle with that rather than just having the knee-jerk Republican action or response or the knee-jerk Democrat response. But first go, okay, as a Christian, I first have to wrestle with what the Bible says and not disregard it just because America didn't exist at the time. That's the danger of liberals. That's what liberals do, of which we are not.
And I think it's like people feel like if I don't speak out, or if I don't march, or if I don't whatever, then I don't care, or I'm part of the problem, or I'm not taking a stand. And I've been so camped out in Daniel because I've been asking myself this question. And you see Daniel with these guys like, Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, Darius, that were like, they're in the Hitler Club too.
Who also claimed to be gods
Who
at the same
claimed to
time.
be God, and like, hey, you don't bow down to me, we're going to toast you. Oh, you won't bow down? Hey, make it 7 times hotter. Like, these were the kind of guys. And yet, Daniel says things like, oh, king, live forever. Like, what are you saying? Hey, I hope Joe Biden lives forever. I hope Donald Trump lives forever. Like, that seems so foreign to us. And then, like, he comes in with, in the middle of this drunken, like, party with Belshazzar, where they say, hey, go get the holy vessels. Let's drink out of them. And God shows up and tells Belshazzar, hey, you're done. And Daniel, in the midst of telling him what God says, I wish this were on your enemies.
Huh.
Like, you see these things, and so he's not compromising. He's just living and with 4 rulers in a row. Like, he's in the lion's den. He's in all this 4 rulers in a row. Daniel doesn't deviate from who he is, but he never dishonors one of these leaders.
Boy, if you did that today about one of our leaders, other Christian, like said, live forever, or other Christians would call you a traitor. I think, depending on the party,
Yeah.
You're a traitor.
And it wouldn't matter which one you said it about.
Right, that's
in our,
exactly
in our
right.
partisan system right now,
Right.
it wouldn't matter.
Right.
If you're a Christian, and your Christian brother would call you a traitor, because how could you say that about that?
And ultimately, I do think this is where we connect. So we've kind of rooted this response in who God is, thanksgiving and honor, but this is also where we connect it to the gospel, because is there not in Daniel's phrasing there the reality we want for everyone?
Yes.
Like, I actually really do want Biden to live in joy and shalom and
Hallelujah.
peace with God forever.
And Trump and every leader.
Yeah. So there is this kind of through line of I love those points you brought up about Daniel. I don't know that I've ever noticed that pattern before, but there isn't that a great faith and love for and passion for in the midst of really false worship, idol worship, like literal in that moment. And so I want to draw us to that too, that our eyes get much bigger further down the road in order to act rightly with government and political leaders today.
And just parenthetically, in every one of those narratives, you get to the end of it, and this horrible, like, Joe Biden times 100 or Donald Trump times 100, like Nebuchadnezzar says, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven." Or if with the four Hebrew children, it's the ruler says, if anyone says anything against their God, you'll be cut in pieces and we'll bulldoze your house. So I think, like, if the point is, like, it's my country and it's my this and it's my that, and we see it slipping away, then there's going to be anger and fear and revolt. But God makes it very clear that even in the worst situations, He is able to make himself known, and that ultimately is what we want.
And so if you read the Daniel stuff, this just came to me. It's almost like Daniel is going to be who God has called him to be, regardless of the policies of the king.
Right.
Like the policies of the king, bad or good, don't affect him at all. He's going to keep doing what God has called him to do, no matter what. It's kind of like that quote I read at the beginning. What if we traded outrage for trust and stillness and shalom? And that's Daniel. He's like in this place of shalom, regardless of what the government's doing. And man, I just don't see that today with Christians. We ride the wave, and some of it I'm sure has to do with the environment and social media and media in general and how so much it invades our lives, no doubt. And yet, what would it be like if the church showed a better way, if we just stayed steady in what we're called to do and you can make all the policies you want to make. We're going to keep doing our thing.
But both ways, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I'm going to kill you. It's like, okay, but I'm not going to. You do whichever you want to do.
Still going to do what's right.
We're not going to worship you. And then it's like, like Belshazzar, before he kicks off, like his last night, he says he puts gold on him and he puts a robe on him and he says, "You're now third man in the whole thing." And Daniel wasn't like.
He was like, okay,
yeah, it
whatever.
Was like, okay. And it's the same thing, because his hope and his identity is not located in what one of these rulers can do. It's just such a beautiful, like, primer.
And then I think our assumption, kind of moving from that, is if all of that happens, if we're able to have that type of view of God being in control, we're able to give thanks and honor appropriate for leaders because of who God is, we exist in whatever political system, in whatever part of history that we're in. I think to get back to our goal of unity, that has to inform horizontal relationships. And I think if I put my pastor hat on, that's what I want to say. It's, okay, God being in charge. We're great at saying that in church. We've got songs that say that. God, old school. If I want to go old school, God doesn't make mistakes. A little bit newer. God, God is sovereign. God's in charge. He's in complete control. We believe all of these things. But that reality then informs behavior, faith, and my interaction with my brothers and sisters. It's a through line. It's the fuel. So that even when we do differ dramatically, it's okay. We can even argue, but it's arguing that's under peace.
Scott Sauls, an author, said we should feel more affinity and affection for believers with whom we disagree politically than with unbelievers with whom we agree politically. And again, that sounds good. Like, who can argue with that on a certain level? But I'm just going to tell you, that's not that easy, because some of you all...
In other words, do I feel more comfortable being with a Christian Democrat or a non-Christian Republican? It should be a Christian Democrat.
Right. I shouldn't be with a group of, whatever party, and it's like, we all just agree politically. You're my brothers. We're one. And yet I can go to church, and it's like, you voted for who? like really, it's almost like you're evil.
Right.
And I have felt that about people.
Yeah.
Because some of you all, you're jacked up. I'm just saying. Like,
Alan, I voted for the right person. Can you say the same?
Some
Wow.
of you all are jacked up. And so and so that's easy to say, but it's not easy to do. But that's what it means when for us to be one, because again, the gospel is bigger than that.
Final thoughts, Matt?
I've just been wrestling with what it means to be salt on this situation. This week I've been thinking about Jesus' command to be salt. How do we salt politically? I don't think his command is for us to be in charge. Like if you got all Christians in America to vote for the same party, we'd win. All those who claim to be Christians.
Sure.
If you got them all to vote Republican, we would have a Republican in the White House indefinitely.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not how God works. He works through weakness, not through Christians amassing strength and getting political power. Has that ever worked for Christians? And not only that, in the history of God's people, have we ever chosen the right king? God's people wanted Saul. That wasn't it. When Samuel went to Jesse and said, "Bring your sons out, one of them's going to be king," he brought them all out, except the one he knew wasn't going to be king, David, who was king. And then Jesus comes on the scene, the King of Kings, and his people rejected him. Mm-hmm. I don't know that we've ever chosen God's king. And so even if you could amass that and get this power grid together for Christians so that Christians can, it doesn't appear like we have the ability to choose the right one. Number two, that's not how God works. The gospel works through weakness. And so then the question is, how do we act as salt? We're always going to be pushing back and holding back the tide of evil and salting it like crazy to try to help it not lose its worth. And you pull the church out and it rots. But we're salting. So what does that look like politically? How do we keep salting, regardless of who's in the White House or regardless of how each other votes? If we can look at one another as we are the salters.
SALTERS.
Yeah, not PSAL. Yeah. So I've just been thinking about that. If we can think, my role is salt. My role is not power. My role is salt, which is very different. A different way of thinking. And I don't have it all figured out. And I'm like, what does that mean and how does that look? But it's just something that's in there.
And I think that we've hit on this a couple of times. This will be my wrap-up thought. Alan, you may have one, and then I'll close us out. But you can feel it. Those of you who are listening so far, you've kind of joined in a conversation. We're not admitting to easy answers. We're admitting to living in the tension and wrestling together for unity, for an understanding of who God is in the middle of this. Like that, I think that's so important. I don't have a perfect idea of what it means for Ryan Ferguson to be salt politically right now, but if I'm willing to admit I don't know, and we can wrestle together as a people at North Hills, like we're doing in this series right now, we could sanctify through the Spirit, sanctify each other and go, oh, that means that what if just North Hills, as one little example, one way we salt is we actually believe that our words still matter when they're digital. When we're talking about politics. Like when I speak, and I've learned this lesson the hard way, when we speak about politics on a social media, like the way I speak still matters. God still has commands about the way I talk, when I talk, why I talk, what it does when I talk. So I love your call to us. Let's wrestle together as we do this. Alan, any final thought here?
Yeah, and I think this would be a great other podcast, because sometimes we think, how do we be salt, and we think of salt like as an oppositional, like everything's going this way and we're holding back the tide. But what Jesus really said in the Sermon on the Mount is, if salt loses its flavor. So salt wasn't something that like made bad people feel bad, or necessarily made sin more apparent. Salt was something like, in those days, if you didn't have salt for your food, it's horrible. And so like we should be those that in the midst of every season are modeling joy and peace and purpose and unity and love and togetherness. That's what brings, like we the church should be the ones that are bringing this shalom to the world. But I think it's so easy for us to become so wrought up over what we're angry or disappointed about that what is it about the church that's even attractive? We think that by shouting at people, someone's going to change. No one's going to change. But when we are just the people of God, it's a third way, not the Republican way or the Democrat way. So I would just say practically for me, as I have been really going after this in my own heart, is when I see not just leaders I disagree with, but the people who like leaders I disagree with, who are believers that sometimes, to be quite frank, I think they're not quite right. And the discipline I have taken on is to pray and give thanks for and honor them. And there are a couple people in particular that, like, it's been almost a daily discipline to my soul to pray, to sincerely pray and give thanks for them. And you know what? It's really changing me in a good way.
And thanks for praying for me, Alan.
Yeah. I didn't want to look at you, Matt.
Well, and I was going to say, and this is actually without humor, and because, again, those of you who are listening recognize we know each other for a very long time, I can say this with no relational effect to Alan. Alan, there are people who you're on their prayer list because of your view and who you're linked to.
I'd love to think that. I mean, truly, that is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. In that same sense. So let me just kind of wrap us up here for a moment. Again, we're, as a church, going through Jesus and politics for 5 weeks here in the summer. These podcasts are additional information to try to help us think biblically and act biblically and call us to different actions than we see Christians doing in culture. I want to end a little bit differently by asking everybody who listens to this to be charitable to the three of us. As we're just having a conversation wrestling, I think when you start talking about politics right now, you literally are putting on a T-shirt that has a bullseye. Mm-hmm. And if we misspoke, we're just sitting here talking, trying to serve God's people. So we just ask for your kindness and your charity, even if you disagree with us. We can do that charitably, and we welcome that interaction. The three of us do. But I think it's okay if we ask for that to be charitable. So thanks for joining us today. Next week, we're going to be discussing, kind of connected to the same area of politics, moral priorities, political topics like the sanctity of life, immigration, poverty, and several others. Some information from our recent survey we hope will inform that. So we're hoping to have a constructive discourse on those particular areas, which I'm sure that's going to be a lot of fun. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.